Ali Beşkök'ü ben işte bu benim eski çalıştığım üniversiteden tanıyorum. Yüksek lisans öğrencisi Orta Doğu'dan mezun olup yüksek lisans yapmak üzere Indiana Purdue Üniversitesi'ne geldi. İşte benim de yüksek lisans konusu olarak da seçtiğimiz konu akışkanlar dinamiği, paralel hesaplama ve o zaman işte dünyanın ilk paralel bilgisayarı olarak bilinen Intel'in IPSC 1 diye şeyi vardı, bir bilgisayarı vardı makinesi. 16 tane IBM PC'leri birbirine bağlamışlar. O zaman IBM'in ilk PC modellerini. İşte biz yani o zaman işte akışkanlar dinamiği problemleri çözüyoruz. Çok büyük, o zaman çok büyük problemler çözdüğümüzü zannediyoruz. Büyük bir de supercomputer'ımız oldu diye işte. Ama paralel şeyi hiç gelişmemişti yani. İlk başlangıcıydı paralel hesaplamanın. Şeyler çok primitifti her şey. İşte sistem de öyle, işte software de öyle ama işte biz çok o zaman herhalde cesurmuşuz. İşte en de zor problemlerden biri compressible transonic rotor stereo interaction problemlerini paralel olarak çözmeye çalışıyorduk. Onun yüksek lisans teziydi. Ali Beşkök'te işte biz beraber çalışıyoruz. Fakat o zaman teknoloji de gelişmemişti, yardım da almak çok zordu. Intel bunu bize çok ucuza vermişti ama birkaç yüz bin liralık da dolarlık da bir makineydi. İşte uzun zaman, işte 2 senede herhalde toplam derslerle, işte tezleri bitirdi ama uzun bir arada bir devamlı bu bitmeyecek falan diye, bunu yapamayacağız, başaramayacağız falan diye böyle çok üzülürdüm. Ben de üzülürdüm tabii o üzüldükçe. Çünkü o makineyi hatırlarım ben, çalışmaya başlaması için 2 saat falan geçerdi galiba. Bunu tepmek için hatırlıyorum. Compiler'ı yoktu, compiler'ı çalışan. Neyse sonra işte herhalde anladı ki bu iş çok zor. Princeton'a gitti, kaçtı. Yani ben bizden yüksek lisans aldım. Princeton'a doktoraya gittim. Ondan Princeton Üniversitesi'ne. Orada daha kolay konular buldum. İşte Microfluidic herhalde daha kolay geldi ona. Bu alanda çok başarılı oldu. İşte çalıştığı yerler Princeton'da doktorasını orada yaptı ama aynı zamanda Brown Üniversitesi'nde de visiting scholar olarak çalıştı. Çünkü çalıştığı hoca galiba Princeton'dan Brown'a geçmişti. 2 yıl MIT'de postdoc olarak çalıştı. Sanırım orada biomedical uygulamaları belki burada girdi. Texas A&M Üniversitesi'nde birkaç yıl çalıştı. Bayağı da 9 yıl çalışmış. Asistan Associate. Old Dominion Üniversitesi'ne gitti. Orada da aslında bir tane Türk dekan var. Oktay Baysal. Onun da üniversitesinde, onun yani fakültesinde işte makine ve havacılık mühendisliği bölümünde çalıştı. Şu anda da Southern Methodist Üniversitesi'nde makine mühendisliğinde hem bölüm başkanı hem de öğretim üyesi. Aslında çok yaratıcı, ondan sonra çok metodik çalışan bir araştırmacıdır. Çok başarılı yaptığı işleri bakın görüyorsunuz. İşte bu kitabı çok meşhur bu alanda. Sonra galiba bu yeni edition. Burada da Çince'ye çevirmişler. Çin'de kitabını. Hocasıyla birlikte yazdığı bir kitap. İşte 2 kitabı, 9 book chapter. Bunlardan bir tanesi de bizim ortak. Evet. 85 dergi yayını, 79 konferans yayını. Bir de 3 tane patent falan gördüm bir yerde. Evet, o da var. Yani patentlere biz şimdi çok önem veriyoruz yani Türkiye olarak, ülke olarak. Bu bizim sağlanmalarımızı bile etkiliyor. Belki patent yapan bir hoca konuşma yaptı dersek belki oradan da puan alabiliriz. Evet. İşte böyle şeyden bir çay molamız, yani çay saatimiz olacak şeyden sonra, konuşmadan sonra kısa. Kendisiyle istediğiniz zaman görüşebilirsiniz. Çünkü tanıyanlarınız var, onu ismen de tanıyan, belki çalışmalarından tanıyan var. kendisiyle iftihar ediyoruz, gurur duyuyoruz. Kısa bir notta 3 ayda 2003 yılında Atılım Üniversitesi Mekatronik bölümünde ziyaretçi öğretim üyesi olarak bulunmuş. Hatta dediğine göre Yalçın Bey'in eski evinde de lojman olarak evinde kalmış. Çankaya'da bir Yalçın Bey'in bir evi varmış. Orada da kalmış uçak. Büyük müydü, nasıl? Çok güzeldi. Ne kadar şanslıymışsın sen. Bunu herhalde Abdülkadir Hoca yarattı bu şansı.
Zannediyorum öyle oldu.
Oldu. Tekrar kendisine hoş geldiniz.
Sayın Hocam çok teşekkürler nazik davetiniz ve bu introduction için. Kusura bakmayın, ben bunu İngilizce yapacağım çünkü teknik terim özellikle bu konularda bilmiyorum. The title of the talk is Microfluidic Applications of AC Electrokinetic Phenomena, but because I am the Department Chair of Mechanical Engineering at SMU, it is important for me to tell you a little bit about our institution. SMU is a private school, although it carries a religious name, but it's quite a secular institution indeed. It is the only university in Dallas. UT Dallas is in Richardson, by the way, so that's why they're not counted. As a private school, we have about 6,000 undergrads and 4,700 graduate students. Dallas Hall is a national monument now because it was built in 1915, and that's when the university started, so it's 101 years old. And from the monument, you can see downtown, as you can say. Now, I am in Law School of Engineering, but before then, we also have a presidential library of George W. Bush on our campus, and that makes it actually a place that a lot of people visit. So it brings visibility.
Is this what do you call that hall? No.
Oh, it's the Dallas Hall.
Dallas Hall. So
Yeah.
Is there administration in that?
Actually, the Denman College is there of sciences. You know, the presidents and provost and so on is in another building. I'm from Law School of Engineering that has about 70 faculty and lecturers, 1,100 undergrads and 1,100 grad students. Of course, you know, not all of them are research-oriented. 187 PhD students are in there. And there are 5 departments listed here. As the Mechanical Engineering Department, we have 16 tenure-track faculty distributed as follows. And we have 2 clinical professors that are research active, and 3 lecturers, they are not research active, and 3 staff members. And we offer the following degree programs: Bachelor of Science in ME, along with dual major in physics, dual major in mathematics, ME and engineering management and entrepreneurship specialization, pre-med biomed specialization, and minoring in business administration. That makes the university rather unique because in 4 years our students can get you know, either 2 bachelor's degrees, or they can actually receive specializations and minors and so on. We have a classical Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering, and we also have an executive program known as Master of Science in Manufacturing Systems Management. This is geared towards professionals in industry who basically are working the daytime. These are weekend and night classes taught by former CEOs of large companies. So it enables people to interact with each other. It's a good way to really learn something through the weekend and try to implement it on Monday. And that's a possibility, which is not really typically the case in any other typical mechanical engineering programs. We also have a doctoral program. And the numbers are as follows. We are the largest in Law School of Engineering with 380 students, 140 pre-majors and 240 majors. Something unique about mechanical engineering at SME is that we have 28% women. And you know, in ASME basically shows us around 12% in average, so we're doing extremely well, and we hope to increase that. And among our grad students, the numbers are as follows. This is the executive program, this is the regular master's that needs to grow a little bit, but I'm very proud to say that we increased the number by 10 compared to last year. Now we have 47 PhD students.
So these are current students, isn't it?
these are current as of this December, basically. So it is not as big as a live state school, but it's extremely effective. And we have the following research centers: University Center for Advanced Manufacturing, and we have experts who does welding of dissimilar materials. And we also have an NSF-supported center for lasers and plasmas for advanced manufacturing. This is additive manufacturing. And we have big robots, and laser sintering is used, and drop by drop they build titanium and other metallic structures. There are a bunch of individual research laboratories as usual, with individual PIs. This is, I joined there in 2013, and these are our research expenditures in $100,000 and journal papers generated. Actually I'm really proud of this number. And with the expenditure, we are about 30% of Law School of Engineering compared to 5 departments. I think ME is doing extremely well. And the best news I can give is for such a small program, our graduate program just recently got ranked number 78 in mechanical engineering graduate education. So we're always looking for very good students and hoping that we can recruit them and we can grow. So that's the spiel that I'd like to give about mechanical engineering and SMU. So today I'm going to talk about microfluidics, which is an emerging technology that allows development of new approaches to synthesize, purify, and rapidly screen chemicals, biologicals, and materials using integrated, massively parallel, miniaturized platforms. It's a mouthful of, but this definition is something that we coined in early 2000s when I was at Texas A&M. It basically touches all aspects of this emerging technology. And of course, the ultimate goal usually is to reduce the lab scale into a portable device, point of care devices, known as lab on a chip, which is used for detection of biological and chemical agents in, say, a handheld device, applied for biomedical, pharmaceutical, environmental monitoring, and defense applications. So such a device requires automation and integration, and it basically touches all these different subjects and even more, like you have to know biology, chemistry, mechanics, electrical components, and so on. In my group, although Dr. Akai told you that I'm a computational scientist, and I had to switch to the dark side and do some experiments. So I'm only talking about my experimental work at this point. So lab on a chip devices would have sample preparation components and flow and detection components that require separation, concentration, pumping, mixing, sensing, and so on. The red highlighted stuff is the things that I do in my lab. So the motivation of this talk is that in these handheld devices, we have two routes. One of them is that we need to do sample separation. The other one is sample concentration. So if you have a clinical sample, you have about very excessive number of organisms per unit sample. And the key is that how are you going to pick the things that you want to pick? So that is known as basically sample separation. So assume that I have a device and I have blood cells and red blood cells, white blood cells, and say cancer cells. Can I do something just to capture the cancer cells, right? So that's an idea of separating circulating tumor cells from blood. So that could be an interesting application. On the other hand, when you deal with sample concentration, that's a slightly different problem, because assume that you have a liter of water, milk, or beverage, and there are only few organisms in there. And the idea is, can you capture what you really want? So assume that you use polymerized chain reaction, which is a DNA amplification methodology. Let's assume that you have only 10 microliter sample. That's very tiny, and you can detect even one organism, which is great. But the key is this: if you use this for concentration purposes and scale it up, that means you need 10 to the 5 organisms in a liter. So you can't go to a lake or get a glass of water and try to basically capture an E. coli or salmonella or something in there, right? So that basically requires sample concentration steps. So the questions that I would like to pose is that, can we use AC electrokinetic phenomena for sample separation and concentration? So this is the objective of the talk. right? So first things first, I know there are fluid dynamicists here, but also, you know, primarily mechanical engineers. Probably, are there any analytical chemistry people here? No, okay. So, well, when an ionized fluid is in contact with a dielectric surface, the surface acquires charges. And you basically form a charged surface. And because everything was electrically neutral, suddenly there will be oppositely charged ions, you know, very close to the surface. This is what we call electrical double layer. And in double layer, there's a portion that's known as diffuse layer, where those ions can move. So if you can apply an electric field along this kind of a channel, and there are basically free positive ions, those ions will go towards the cathode. As they move, they're going to move the water molecules, and you can actually start pumping a fluid in a microchannel, not with motion of a surface, not with pressure, but with electric fields. That is known as an electroosmotic flow, right? And this is extremely common because electric fields goes linearly with the channel average velocity, and that means that it is much easier to create flows in such scales than pulsar flow that's run by pressure gradients. Okay? So everything I will show you is made in my lab. So as you can see, you apply electric field, and we seeded the flow with particles, and the particles are going back and forth. Particle has, of course, their own electrophoresis, but let's assume that it doesn't exist for the time being. As you can see, you can control the flow by doing this. So basically, that is the basic electrokinetic phenomena. But what happens if you start applying AC fields? What do you really observe? So everything I'm going to show you from here on is done in a very simple setup. Basically, we have a glass slide, and we sputter very thin electrodes on them. And this is as thin as maybe 20 nanometers of gold. So it's see-through most of the time. So if you have electrodes, then you can apply different electric fields in there, and there are gaps and so on. You use an O-ring, and you put, for example, fluid with some colloidal particles or biological cells in it, and you basically change the applied electric frequency and the voltage. You can have very simple electrodes like interdigitated geometry, or you can have things that have squares and so on, and like at a given time say this is positive, that's negative, and so on, or positive, negative, and it's an AC field. So what we do is that we look from the bottom, and we observe the response of colloidal particles to the AC electric field. So in order to show you what is possible, here's a movie, and we're using 800 nanometer gold nanoparticles in a given solution, and the gap between the electrodes is 30 microns. This is the glass part, this is the gold part. You know, right now there's a lot of light in this room, but you can actually see some particles perhaps moving you know, barely in the screen. So we're applying 2.5 volts, and we start with no electric field, 100 hertz, 1 megahertz, and 10 hertz. This is totally Brownian, 100 hertz, now 1 megahertz, and 10 hertz. You can actually see. So you can actually manipulate colloidal motion using electric fields. So can we use this kind of phenomena to concentrate or capture cells? So overall, when you look into this movie, you observe that there are three kinds of effects: AC, EO flows, dielectrophoresis, and electrophoresis. I'll be mostly concentrating on DEP. There are also other effects, obviously, because you have electrothermal effects, you have ionized fluids, you have high conductivities, gravity, Brownian motion, which you can't really help. And then there's van der Waals interactions, double layer overlaps, interactions of particles with surfaces, and so on. Things that you cannot easily tune. When we look into this movie and create an observation matrix, this is frequency versus applied voltage. And although these look weak, of course the voltage is weak. If you look at the top row, we can easily see different phenomena happening. Each of them corresponds to a different case. Like the first column is the electrophoresis of the particles where they were moving back and forth. The second one, I don't know if you can see, but the gap between the electrodes are quite open, and the darkness over here shows that particles moved away. And that is what we call AC electroosmosis. And the last two are typical behavior of dielectrophoresis. Okay? So now, I know that these exist for this particular, colloidal particle under given conditions, like frequency applied electric field. Can we really come up with a way of creating a phase diagram so that before I really go do any experiments, I can actually predict what to expect? That is our goal. And in order to do that, we took ourselves a simple interdigitated electric geometry where the electric field is quite simple, and we create an order of magnitude analysis. And while doing that, I would like to demonstrate to you each of the phenomena that I have mentioned. Electrophoresis is the motion of electrically charged substance under an electric field. And if it's an AC electric field, this is what we do. So you have a charged particle, you apply an electric field, and depending on the direction of the electric field, it will go. And then if you just reverse it, it will just basically go back and forth. That is known as AC electrophoresis, which relates itself to the mobility of the particle and also is affected by the inertia effect of the particle. And the bottom line here is, following Brian's paper, is that you can come up with a displacement that will happen for a given frequency or a time scale under this phenomenon. So it's just an order of magnitude analysis, a very simple way of predicting a displacement of a particle. The second thing I said was AC electroosmosis, which is due to the interactions of the tangential electric field with the induced charges on the electrode. It's okay, mouthful. Let's see what it is. I have a positive electrode and a negative electrode, and I have the electrical double layer, and assume that this is the thick double layer. Okay? Electric field is always perpendicular to the surface, but if the double layer is thick, there will be a very small tangential component of this electric field. So take that tangential component and use the charge of the double layer. If the electrode is positively charged, double layer is negatively charged. For that reason, you create a body force towards right at this edge of this electrode. Okay? And similarly, because electric field lines are coming here, it has a small tangential component. Negative electrode will attract positive ions in there, and this is about 3 to 300 nanometers thick. Based on the conductivity of the fluid, you create a body force like this. So if I have a body force like that, pushing the fluid, then I create a flow like that. Now, if I change the polarity, assume that this is going to be positively charged, and then the electric field lines are reversed, but my double layer is going to be negatively charged, and for that reason, my body force will still be in the same direction. So, the bottom line is, although you do AC field, body force does not really flip the direction. It's always the same direction, and you can actually induce a flow by doing this. So what you expect is streamlines, patterns like this. Look at that movie. There were a bunch of particles. Hopefully you can see it from the back, but a bunch of particles are being pushed on the top of the electrodes. This is very typical of AC electrophoresis of colloidal particles. I hope it doesn't kill the videotaping, but as you can see, they're being pushed. Right? So what we can do is follow the work of Green and look into the kind of flow that one can generate. And without getting into the details, there's a tangential electric field that's very dominant at the edges of the electrode. And rather than using a charge of the surface or the surface potential, you can actually look into the double layer or diffuse layer potential. And by making this analysis, one can come up with a displacement metrics again as a function of time. And this is again useful as an order of magnitude analysis. So the last thing that I would like to show you is the dielectrophoresis, which is the motion of polarizable particles that are suspended in an ionic solution and subject to a spatially non-uniform electric field. Depending on the polarizability of the particle, if it is larger than that of the fluid, the particles will go to high electric field gradients, known as positive dielectrophoresis. Otherwise, they are repelled, known as negative DEP. So this is our square electrodes, where at a given time, each of them have same polarity, positive, negative, and so on. But we're actually using 1 micron and 4 micron particles, larger and smaller ones. And we first apply 20 megahertz for 10 seconds and then switch to 400 kilohertz. So I guess the movie has to be restarted if we can. Otherwise, let's just go like this. Okay. Are they moving? Oh. Okay.
It's your computer.
Huh?
It's your computer.
It's my computer, I know. Well, it was moving. You saw it, right?
It's
Huh?
it used to move. You stopped it.
Oh, okay.
No,
Oh, there you go. Okay. You see, at 20 megahertz, everything went to here, which is an electric field minima. And this is a typical negative dielectrophoresis. But when you switch to 400 kilohertz, the smaller particles are chaining. And this is positive, this is negative, that's a large electric field gradient. That's a minima, this is maxima. So that's why, as you can see, the particles show different behaviors. Can we use this to really separate particles from each other? The dielectrophoresis is based on the forces and torques generated by a dipole moment, M, and the effective dipole moment for a spherical particle is a function of the particle's radius cube and the permittivity of the medium and the Clausius-Mossati factor, which I will explain in detail, and the applied electric field. So generally, you can have a complex electric field that has a real and imaginary component, and knowing the dipole moment, one can basically come up with a time average DEP force, which can have two components as seen here. One is the real part, the other one is the imaginary part. This first one is what we emphasize in our studies, but this is basically due to the non-uniform phase angle of the electric field. And I would like to demonstrate to you what happens if I use 4 electrodes, and these are the polarities, and let this turn. As you turn this around, that way, you make sure to turn a particle in between, all right? It's because the dielectric properties of these particles will react to this turning electric field. This is what happens if you're using cervical cancer cells, HeLa cells. You can see one electrode here, another one there. They're turning at different speeds. The rotation rate is actually an indication of the electric properties of these particles. Right? I did not pursue this any further. Instead, I basically focused on this easier component and tell you the things that we have done. So when you look into the DEP force with constant phase electric field, it is given, it's first of all proportional to the cube of the radius of the particle, which makes it extremely effective for microscale, and which is good for biological cells, but viruses being in the nanoscale, actually DEP force is going to be very small unless you have a very large electric field, and that may require actually sub-micron scale electrodes to deal with viruses, which we are not doing, but micron scale electrodes with biological cells work extremely well. Now, the force is a function of these 7 parameters, which is basically permittivity and conductivity of the particle, and the fluid, the size of the particles, the applied frequency, electrode design, and the electric field. So if you have a spherical homogeneous particle, you can actually see that the Clausius-Mossati factor is really a complex parameter that is affected by not only the permittivity of the particle of the fluid, but also conductivity, and the applied frequency comes in play. That means if I change the frequency, I can change the response. And that's why you see different responses of particles with different applied fields. Okay? So And the key is if you just assume a solid particle and assume that this is deionized water, or basically maybe even a higher level, more ionization in the water, you may actually have different responses for the same particle, like latex. And based on the frequency space, you may have so-called positive DEP if the Clausius-Mosati factor is positive, or you will have a negative DEP if it is negative. And it's also noteworthy to realize that at lower conductivities, you can have a strong positive DEP, and then there's a crossover somewhere around here. This is a crossover frequency, then it becomes negative. So that's why positive DEP response and negative DEP response can be different. And in high conductivity fluids, you may only be ending up with negative DEP for, say, latex particles. So following up with what can happen is that, without getting into too much details, you can actually come up with an estimate for displacement of a particle as well, coming from this work. Then, when we put together all order of magnitude analysis that I have presented, you have DEP response, ACEO, and electrophoretic responses. There's always Brownian motion and gravitational effects. If I can use this, perhaps I can create a phase diagram. That's the idea. And that will tell me what I can do or what I expect experimentally. So let's assume that, say, we have 1 micron polystyrene particle. If I know the particle, I know its sigma and epsilon. Those are all determined. And if I know the applied voltage that I would like to use and the electrode spacing, I can come up with frequency versus conductivity phase diagram. Or if I have basically, gold, now I know this particle and its properties. If I pick the ionic conductivity of the fluid and the electrode design, I can actually have voltage versus frequency diagram. And these are the basically maps that we generate to try to understand what we expect in any experiment that we do. I'm just going to prove one of them for you. And this is for polystyrene particles in DI water. And what will happen here is that actually this is not really Siemens per meter. Probably there's a mistake. This may not be the correct conductivity. But we use this following conductivity. And as you can see, this is 0.1. AC electroosmosis, yes, the particles are mostly on the top of the electrodes. As you get like 0.4 here, which is up there, you have a strong positive DEP. You get closer, and now positive DEP is turning into negative DEP, so it gets weaker. And over here is a negative DEP. That means the particles are pushed away. So we basically, in this paper, validated this phase diagram for various cases. So what we realize here is that DEP is great. You can see positive and negative DEP response, but most of the applications are happening in high conductivity solutions. Like, we were interested in food and beverage safety, so this is basically 0.2 Siemens per meter. Blood has, or the PBS solution physiological buffer is 1.5 Siemens per meter. Indeed, what we expect is, at lower concentrations, everything worked well. At higher concentration, you have nothing but negative DEP. Or, of course, Brownian AC electroosmosis and negative DEP. So the idea was, how can we actually create a better way of creating a negative DEP, making it useful? Well, could there be flow helping us? Indeed, in the frequencies that we use, AC electroosmosis is negligible. So it is not possible to use ACEO and get these together to create something useful to concentrate stuff. Because think about it, fluid will come here and bring the particles in, and then maybe these will concentrate. But in this case, it will be just spreading them away. But it doesn't happen that way. There are other effects that one has to know. Because we're using a high conductivity fluid, we have Joule heating in this system, and that means I can have electrothermal flow, which happens due to temperature-dependent variations of conductivity and permittivity of the liquid, or you can have buoyancy-driven flow that happens due to the density fluctuations under gravity. It turns out that buoyancy-driven flow is not you know, critical for microfluidics. You know, there's a critical Rayleigh number, as you well know, and you know, we don't get that high, but electrothermal effects can be utilized. So what we did is we tried to simulate that, and depending on the height of the chamber that you have, these are our square electrodes, you actually can create flows in these periodic structures, in the sense that you can have a circulating, you know, loops like that, and assume that particles are brought in, and this is my minima, electric field minima, and I created a dome, and under the dome, everything is going to basically go there and stay there. And of course, there is a possible lift, but if the gravity also helps you, you may be able to concentrate particles right in the middle. Or you can actually totally ignore this and create only a 20 micron height chamber, and then, you know, of course, the circulating loops and so on are not very important, and this may or may not work. So what we did was we used apple juice and we used 2% fat milk, and these are the conductivities here, and applying for 30 minutes in these square electrodes, which is hard to see in this, but these are our square electrodes. Hopefully you realize that we were able to concentrate Clostridium sporogenous bacterial spores in these electric field minimas. And that was our work for food and beverage safety. Overall, our observations are that for separation of two cell lines or particles, selection of the medium conductivity and field frequency are done on an ad hoc basis. This is what happens when you look into people's work. They say, we tried this, we tried that, and this worked. Well, this happens, and of course, I hate trial and error. So I assume that prior knowledge of the electric properties of cells or particles can eliminate this guesswork. And that can be maintained by creating what we call impedance spectroscopy, which is a tool to measure the electric properties of these entities. And other observation is DEP is effective only in low conductivity buffers, and in most biological cells exhibit transient dielectric properties in LCBs. Just like, you know, the biological cells would like to pump ions out in order to equilibrate with their environments. So making experiments in transience is not a good idea as well, and that was not very well described in the literature. And another observation is DEP becomes ineffective in high conductivity medium, especially in PBS solution and plasma and so on. So we basically try to address these needs so that we can create something useful. First, let me talk about dielectric spectroscopy. This is a work with Ahmetcan Sabuncu, which was published in 2012 in Microfluidics. Idea is very simple. I can create a microchannel, and I can have two electrodes on the top and the bottom, and I basically put a bunch of fluid cells in it, and the cells, and then I apply, by using an impedance analyzer, I measure the electrical impedance in the frequency domain, from low frequencies up to maybe 100 megahertz. Then using this data, assuming constant phase element model, which is described here, to take care of electrode polarization, I'm able to basically use so-called the cold model that shows the dispersion for biological cells. Then using a mixture model that has basically, this is the mixture, I can actually obtain the properties for cells, which enables me to predict the Clausius-Mossati factor. And even further on, if I assume that every cell is as simple as a single shell or a double shell, I can actually then extract the cell properties, like the conductivity and permittivity of the cell medium and cytoplasm and so on. And this can indeed create what I call quantitative biology. Now, this is hot off the press now. Well, not press yet, but hot off my lap, because I just received that as I arrived to Turkey. This is the device that we built. We said, let us have an inlet and an outlet, and let us have a bunch of valves in our chip. So this is the picture of our valves. and here's a zoomed out version. And here's one periodic geometry that we can see. And if I apply, because these are electrodes, as the particles are passing by, if I apply a correct frequency here, I may induce positive dP. Why? Because electric field lines are going to come here, and that means there are large electric field gradients. I can capture cells that are flowing by in the wells. And then I can stop applying the electric field and connect this to an impedance analyzer and obtain the electrical impedance, make my measurement, and then I'm going to actually switch the electric field to a different frequency. If I can see a negative dB, these particles are going to get out and will be washed out. If you can build a device like this, you can capture the cells, measure their properties, or induce changes from the inlet, change pH, osmolarity, induce some drugs, or maybe ion channel blockers and so on. And as a result of that, measure the response of the cells and then empty the whole thing. So let's hope this works. This part has been a little bit long, I think. There you go. As the particles are flowing by, we turn on the DEP, and hopefully you can see something really filled in here. And then these are the filled, wells. We measure the electric properties, then we empty them. And by doing that, I'm hoping to actually really get into more quantitative measurements of properties of biological cells. Having used something like this enables you to separate cells from each other. So, for example, if you have a desired conductivity of the buffer, you can separate two different cell lines. B16 is mouse melanoma, skin cancer cell. Jurkat is human leukemia cell. And Jurkats are dark, and B16s are stained, as you can see. Without any flow in this square geometries, we can actually separate them from each other. And the thing about positive DEP is these are loose to move, but these are trapped, because positive DEP always grabs onto it. So if you actually wash the whole thing, you'll be left with only B16. And that's the way of separating cells from each other. Here's an example of what happens when you deal with PC3, that's basically prostate cancer cells. And first of all, prostate cancer cells show very weak dependence on time. These are different dielectric measurements that we did, and the classes mosaic factor that we obtained up to 10 minutes and up to 40 minutes with different colors in a simple device like this. And as you can see, when we turn on the electric field, we start getting them.
Which one are cancer cells?
So far, all of them are cancer cells. Okay, but the key is, of course, can we really separate them from something like blood? And when we did this time-dependent measurements, we realized that blood really shows at the similar frequencies mostly negative DEP. So here's a case where cancer cells are already immobilized at the edges of the electrodes, where smaller cells are basically mostly, of course, overwhelmingly red blood cells are flowing by. And you can actually see that this really works. Of course, there might be some stuck white blood cells in there as well, but this is for us to discover later on. So overall, though, there's a caveat, is that we have to use 0.06 Siemens per meter, but the blood is 1.5 Siemens per meter. That means there has been dilution in this. It would be nice to do this without dilution. But then negative DEP becomes ineffective at high conductivities, and dielectric spectroscopy does not work very well either. So that actually pushed us towards something different, that almost like material science a little bit. But first, what we realize is that what really happens is that you expect that there are electrodes, and there's going to be a dielectric effects coming from the electrodes, and there will be an effect due to dielectric relaxation of cells. When you do this in basic electrodes that we fabricated in 1.5 Siemens per meter, we actually get that's the data. This is our fit, and when we work out basically what happens to a cell suspension, we get something like this. we cannot use this. What we need is something like that we can apply the cold model to, and indeed we could do this if we can actually change our electrodes from plain electrodes to what we call fractal electrodes. So we learned different things. How can you make a fractal electrode? Well, it is a very standard photolithographic method that we used. We spin coat the glass with positive photoresist. We use a mask and a UV light, and we do a UV exposure, and then immerse it in a developer, so this part is gone, and then we do a metal deposition. So far, everything is standard. But at this stage, we do electrochemical deposition using the potentiate mode, and we actually cover things with gold nanostructures. And everything basically grows on all the gold, because this is conductive, and everywhere now I have nanostructures, and we bake it, and then we immerse it in PG remover, and now we have gold portion that I'm interested in that has only the fractal structure, which you rinse and solve. If you do not use this mask business and do it this way, then you end up growing fractal structures all over, and when this is positive, when this is negative, and so on, they basically create a useless electrode, because now you have a problem. So it works, and here's a picture of a fractal electrode with different magnifications. This is, it's very hard to see how many times, but this is basically 75,000 times. And you can tell that there is a fractal similarity over here. And this is the smooth electrodes that we use. So indeed, it works extremely well that way, and we can actually measure, as I have shown up here. And now I have a way of measuring the electric properties of cells in high conductivity medium. And then we thought, what happens to DEP? Because it wasn't working very well in high conductivity medium. So we did these experiments with fractal versus planar electrodes. And the whole idea is this. I have this interdigitated electrode geometry, and this is center of one of them, like in between the two electrodes, and say this is one of the edges, and here's a picture of a cell. So I can actually look into a motion of a cell because I'm applying an electric field, and when you look into a motion of a particle, there's mass times acceleration and the total force acting on it. Total force is made out of the drag force and the force due to the electrophoresis. The drag force is the typical Stokes drag, where we take care of the wall correction, because this is immersed in between, it is sandwiched in between two parallel plates. There are analytical solutions for it. You put the wall correction factor in it and so on, and you end up with solving this ordinary differential equation, and that is the solution of it. Apparently there is a characteristic time scale shown with a tau that turns out to be extremely fast. So what we do here is we take the motion of the particles for 20 frames per second video. 20 frames per second is too slow to actually understand acceleration of the particle. So almost you expect that the velocity is balanced with the dielectrophoretic force. So it's almost like quasi-steady response. Now, the key thing that I would like to show you here is that although the velocity is a function of time, because particle is moving, because of the fact that it is proportional to the DEP force, which changes with the space, you can actually see your results at the velocity changing as a function of space. This is only true if you have identical or similar radius particles. So as I click, you're going to see 4 movies simultaneously starting. One of them is on the left is going to be for gold particles. The one on the right is going to be for yeast. And F shows for fractal. P shows for plane electrodes. Here we go. Fractal and plane. See, the fractal ones move much faster. So we looked at identical diameter yeast cells and gold nanoparticles. And because of the fact that we're showing velocity versus location, I had to take the derivative of the data, and there's some Brownian motion. That's why I have a lot of noise in this. But there are two general trends. Basically, the particles subjected to fractal electrodes move faster than the plane electrodes for both cases. And we indeed have shown that similar do happen, even at 1.5 Siemens per meter, where I regularly would not see any DEP response. So for the case of plane electrodes, we have found different particles. These are yeast cells at the edge of the electrodes, and I expect them to move, but they don't in high conductivity medium, but they do when you're in fractal electrode system. And the proof of it is below. Using fractal electrodes, negative DEP worked. We can actually concentrate the yeast in PBS, which it doesn't work with plane electrodes. So I would like to conclude by summarizing what we have done. I presented a scaling analysis which describes particle motion in the frequency and amplitude and conductivity phase planes, and which we experimentally verified. I have shown that we built negative DEP traps that enable sample concentration from high conductivity fluids, and microfluidic dielectric spectroscopy we described enables measuring dielectric properties of biological cells, which can be used for characterization of the cells. And we developed a new fabrication technique by using this mask, and now we have fractal electrodes that actually do work well with colloidal particles and biological cells when it comes to both DEP as well as dielectric spectroscopy applications. So, and also the last thing I have shown you was fractal gold electrodes have increased DEP response both for positive and negative DEP. Something that I didn't really talk about was some play that we did. We found ourselves some conductive thread, and it was actually silver-coated thread, and we actually coated it further using platinum black. And these are threads, and these are colloidal particles, and you can see the particle chaining and how this is like almost like a flat part versus a sharp part, and how the particles align even with the thread. And the idea was, can we build a smart band-aid that will enable coagulation of blood? So, we're playing with these kind of ideas currently, and I would like to finish the talk by acknowledging the grant funding, but most importantly, my former and current PhD students. And you can see among them there are some Turkish names. People with blue names are the ones that have contributed to this talk. So thank you very much for your patience.
So you're sponsored, funded by Food Protection and Defense, National Center?
Yeah, and National Homeland Security. This is actually a center of Department of Homeland Security, and that's why they were interested in food and beverage safety, water safety. We have actually funding from NIH, and NASA was interested in this too, in this program. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question about the outcome of your research, and I congratulate you, of course, as a former student of ours. We are very proud to have you in this position. Now, your technique, I suppose, can be used for diagnostic applications, like non-destructive diagnostic applications for some diseases, like cancer and so on. Was there any attempt to utilize it for that purpose?
Actually, I wanted to, understand the dielectric properties of cancer cells and distinguish it from normal cells. And I believe there's a significant difference on the membrane capacitance, which we can measure very accurately. So using that, probably we can use it as a diagnosis. So especially for detection of circulating tumor cells. But that's a very long and hard work that requires a lot of grant funding, which we're not able to get it yet. We had lunch, and I was saying that this Arnold Köprü was using his own blood in the movie that I have shown you. So,
Because you cannot get the blood elsewhere.
Getting blood from elsewhere is very tricky. And there's something that's new.
Paperwork.
A lot of paperwork, and yeah, there can be diseases and so on. But there's something that Dr. Sabuncu came up with is using capacitive sensing for tissue diagnosis. Because you know, these smartphones know where your finger is, because there are a bunch of lines passing vertical and you know, parallel, vertical and laterally, and there's a small dielectric substance in between them, and as your finger approaches, they're fringing electric fields, and they sense that. If you do this in the frequency domain, more than likely, of course, without the glass on the whole thing, we can actually understand dielectric properties at the intersection of these two wires as a function of frequency, and this is very similar to the dielectric spectroscopy we are doing. But it doesn't require any fluidics, so you can have an N by N system using only N actuators, because like one at a time, the wiring is easier, and that's what we are working on right now. And indeed, we are working with UT Southwestern Medical Center, which is a very you know, highly ranked medical school in Dallas, to develop this and apply it for understanding polyps in colonoscopies. It could be done as a skin scanner, for example, for skin cancer as well, potentially. So we're trying to get some funding on that. Other questions?
These former students, they all were in South Methodist University, Southern Methodist University.
These are the current ones. Pradip is in Milliken and Company in South Carolina, and so on. And well, yeah, Junaid
They all
Sart.
studied with you
Huh?
at which university?
Junaid Sart is my student from Texas A&M, for example. Yeah, and yeah, there's also Murat
Are you
Barışık
still
there.
collaborating with them? Or?
Not with Junaid, but Murat and I, we work together. He's an expert on phonon transport and interface phenomena, and we do molecular dynamic simulations to study that. Yeah. So.
Do you think that this work can be extended for deposits of residues on blood veins?
Oh, like cholesterol stuff.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. It is possible to actually manipulate that, but you have to.
Extrapolation of this.
It could be useful perhaps on stents, but then it will be active material, and it may not be a good idea to put it, you know.
To eliminate the use of stents, actually.
It could be interesting, but putting electric fields, especially near the heart, is not a good idea.
That's the problem. How to do it in vivo.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Other questions? Well,
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.